I'm Kaya, 28, female, and my parents lied about a family reunion to hide the fact that I wasn't invited to my own brother's lavish engagement party. The lie itself was a sharp, quick pain, but the silence that followed, the space they willingly carved out where I was supposed to be, is a wound that has been much slower to heal. This wasn't the first time I'd been made to feel like a satellite in my own family's solar system, a distant moon orbiting the bright, burning sun that is my brother, Rowan. But it would be the last. Our family dynamic was set in stone long before I was old enough to understand it. Rowan, 3 years my senior, was the golden child, the prodigy. He was destined for greatness from the moment he aced his first spelling test. Our parents, Marcus and Alara, weren't cruel people in the way storybooks depict villains. They were simply focused. And their focus was perpetually on Rowan. My existence, it seemed, was secondary, a quieter echo in the grand hall of his achievements. I remember my 8th birthday vividly. I had asked for a magic kit, my heart set on learning card tricks and making foam balls disappear. My parents had smiled and nodded, but their attention was elsewhere. Rowan, then 11, had been complaining for weeks that his bicycle was too childish. On the morning of my party, as my friends were set to arrive, my dad, Marcus, wheeled a gleaming 21-speed mountain bike into the living room. It was for Rowan. Just an early present for doing so well on his midterm exams, Dad had announced, beaming. Rowan's triumphant whoop drowned out my quiet. What about my magic kit? The kit did appear later, a small box tucked away behind the massive bicycle helmet and pump, but the message was clear. Even on my day, his wants were bigger, louder, and more important. My party felt like an afterthought, my little friends eating cake in the shadow of Rowan's brand-new, metallic blue Triumph. This pattern cemented itself as we grew older. When it came time for college applications, the household was a pressure cooker of anxiety and excitement, all for Rowan. He was applying to top-tier law schools, and my parents spared no expense. Tutors, admissions counselors, campus visit trips. The year he got his acceptance letter to a prestigious university was marked by a catered dinner party for all their friends. The air buzzed with pride. 3 years later, when I announced my decision to pursue a degree in fine arts with a focus on photography, the reaction was muted. "Oh, honey, that's nice," my mom, Ilara, had said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Is that a stable career path?" my dad had asked, his brow furrowed with a concern he never once showed for the cutthroat world of corporate law. There was no party for me. There was only a quiet, unspoken understanding that my path was a whimsical detour, while Rowan S. was the main highway to success. The financial support was the most tangible proof. When Rowan graduated, my parents proudly co-signed and helped with a significant down payment on a sleek condo downtown. It was framed as a smart investment in his future. When I, struggling to make ends meet as a freelancer, asked for a small loan to upgrade my camera equipment, the very tools of my trade, I was met with a lecture on fiscal responsibility. "Kaya, you need to learn to budget better," Marcus told me, his tone patient as if explaining a complex concept to a child. "Your brother worked very hard for his opportunities." The fact that I was regularly working 60-hour weeks, juggling clients and chasing invoices, was irrelevant. My hard work was invisible because it didn't come with a six-figure salary and a corner office. So when my mom called me 2 weeks ago, her voice light and breezy, to tell me about a last-minute family reunion, a little warning bell chimed in the back of my mind. But I silenced it. Hope, even the most battered and bruised kind, is a stubborn thing. Maybe this time I thought it would be different. "Hi, sweetie, how are you?" Ilara's voice chirped through the phone. It was the voice she used when she wanted to soften a blow or gloss over an inconvenient truth. "I'm good, Mom, just wrapping up a shoot," I said, wiping down a lens and placing it carefully in my camera bag. "What's up?" "Well, it's all very sudden, but we've decided to have a little family reunion this weekend. Your Aunt Carol found this adorable rustic cabin for rent up by Crystal Lake, and we all just thought, let's do it." My heart did a little flutter, a family reunion, all of us. Wow, that does sound sudden. This weekend. I glanced at my calendar. It was empty, a rare, perfect blank slate. Yes, I know it's crazy, she laughed, a sound like wind chimes. It's just a very quick trip, not worth you traveling all this way for, of course. The flutter in my chest stopped. It fell, heavy and cold, into the pit of my stomach. I was in the same state, a 4-hour drive away. Rowan lived 5 hours away in the opposite direction. What do you mean, not worth me traveling? I could be there by dinner on Friday. Oh, honey, you don't want to do that, she said quickly, a little too quickly. Honestly, the cabin is tiny. There's barely enough room for us old folks as it is. It's very primitive. I don't even think there's reliable cell service. She painted a picture of a rough-hewn shack, a place of charming discomfort. Besides, you know how your father gets on these trips. He'll just want to fish and play cards. You'd be so bored. Every word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall between me and this reunion. Each excuse was delivered with such loving concern that to argue with it would make me seem ungrateful and difficult. It was a tactic I knew well. They weren't excluding me, they were sparing me. Sparing me the long drive, the cramped quarters, the boredom. How thoughtful. Is Rowan going? I asked, already knowing the answer. Well, yes, he and Cleo are managing to get away. You know Rowan, he can't turn down a chance to beat his father at poker, she said, her voice warming with pride. Of course. Rowan, the busy corporate lawyer, could find the time. Rowan and his sophisticated fiancée, Cleo, were willing to endure the primitive conditions. But for me, the freelancer with an open schedule, it was just too much of an imposition. The lie was so transparent it was almost insulting. A dull ache of resignation settled over me. I could fight it. I could call her out, demand to know why they were so determined to keep me away. But I knew where that would lead. I would be accused of being dramatic, of not trusting them, of trying to make things difficult. They would sigh and sound wounded, and in the end, nothing would change. They would just be more careful with their lies next time. So I didn't fight. I swallowed the bitterness and forced a brightness into my own voice. Oh, okay, well, that's a shame. I would have loved to see everyone. I know, sweetie. We'll do something with just you really soon, I promise, she said, the empty promise hanging in the air between us. You go have a fun weekend. Do something for yourself. Yeah, maybe I will, I said, my voice flat. Maybe I'll go for a hike. That's a wonderful idea, see. It all works out for the best. It always did for them. We ended the call, and I stood in the silence of my studio, the weight of their casual dismissal pressing down on me. They didn't want me there. It was that simple. For a reason they wouldn't give me, my presence was not required. I looked at my empty calendar, which had seemed like a gift just minutes before. Now, it felt like a confirmation of my own irrelevance. But as the initial sting faded, a familiar, quiet resolve took its place. They wanted me to be separate. Fine, I would be separate. Mom's suggestion, meant as a placating pat on the head, began to take root. A hike, not just a walk in the local park, but a real, challenging climb. There was a mountain about 2 hours away, Mount Sterling, with a summit that was supposed to have the most breathtaking views in the state. The decision felt like taking a breath after being held underwater. I spent the next hour planning, not with bitterness, but with a growing sense of defiance. I packed my best hiking boots, my day pack, water, and snacks. I charged my camera batteries. If my family was going to have their reunion, I was going to have my own. I would find a space so wide and open that their tiny, exclusionary world couldn't touch me. I would climb so high that I could look down on everything, and for a little while, feel free. Friday evening, as my family was presumably settling into their rustic cabin, I was driving towards the mountains, the windows down and the music turned up loud. The city lights gave way to the deep, velvet dark of country roads. I felt a sense of release, of shedding a skin I hadn't realized was so tight. The air grew cooler, cleaner, tinged with the scent of pine. I wasn't heading toward a place of obligation and forced smiles. I was heading towards a challenge I had chosen for myself. I stayed in a small, cheap motel at the foot of the mountain and was up before the sun on Saturday. The trailhead was quiet, steeped in the cool, misty air of dawn. The first part of the trail was a gentle incline through a dense forest. Sunlight struggled to pierce the thick canopy, dappling the path in shifting patterns of light and shadow. The only sounds were the crunch of my boots on the trail, the chirping of unseen birds, and the rushing of my own breath. With every step, the tension in my shoulders seemed to loosen. The hurt and confusion of my mom's phone call began to recede, replaced by the simple, grounding rhythm of walking. My family, my brother, the lie, it all felt very far away. Out here, there was no favoritism. The mountain didn't care about my profession or my bank account. It demanded only strength, endurance, and respect. It was honest. The path was difficult, but it never pretended to be easy. As the morning wore on, the trail grew steeper and more rugged. I scrambled over rocks and navigated switchbacks that revealed tantalizing glimpses of the valley below. My legs burned, and my lungs ached, but I felt powerful. My body, which often felt clumsy and inadequate in a world that valued my brother's sharp intellect, was strong and capable here. My mind, usually cluttered with anxieties about clients and finances, was clear and focused on the next step, the next foothold. This was my element. Photography had taught me to see the world, but hiking taught me how to be in it. After nearly 4 hours of grueling climbing, I broke through the tree line. The world opened up. The sky was a vast, brilliant blue, and below me, a rolling sea of green and gold stretched out to the horizon. I was breathless, and not just from the climb. It was beautiful, stunningly, heartbreakingly beautiful. I pushed on for the final 20 minutes, my heart pounding with anticipation, until I finally stood on the rocky summit. I had it all to myself. I dropped my pack and walked to the edge, a gentle breeze cooling the sweat on my face. The view was panoramic, a 360-degree masterpiece of nature's artistry. I felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet joy that was entirely my own. I hadn't earned it by winning a case or closing a deal. I had earned it with my own 2 feet. I pulled out my phone and my camera. I had to capture this. I set up my small, flexible tripod on a rock, framed the shot, and set the timer. I took a few, but one stood out. It was a simple selfie with me in the foreground, smiling a genuine, unforced smile. My hair was messy, my face was flushed, but my eyes were bright with accomplishment. Behind me, the entire world seemed to fall away. It was a picture of pure, solitary happiness. I sat there for an hour, eating a squashed sandwich and drinking water, feeling more at home on that lonely peak than I ever had in my parents' crowded living room. The descent was easier, my steps lighter. By the time I reached my car in the mid-afternoon, I was exhausted but glowing with a deep sense of satisfaction. I drove to a small town nearby and found a little cafe with Wi-Fi. I just wanted to post the picture, to share a piece of the day's victory, before heading home. I ordered a coffee, sat down, and connected to the network. I opened my social media app, ready to upload my summit selfie, but before I could, my feed refreshed, and that's when I saw it. The first photo wasn't from my mom or my dad or Rowan. They were all too careful for that. It was from a distant cousin, a woman named Chloe who I barely knew. She had tagged my brother. The picture stopped my breath. There was Rowan, grinning in a perfectly tailored suit. Beside him, in a stunning white dress, was his fiancée, Cleo. They were standing under a floral arch, their arms around each other, looking ecstatic. Behind them, through the large windows of what was clearly an elegant ballroom, was a manicured golf course, not a shimmering lake. The caption read, "So incredibly happy to celebrate these two. Congratulations on your engagement, Rowan and Cleo. She said yes, surprise party." My coffee went cold in my hands. A surprise engagement party. Not a fishing trip. Not a rustic cabin. A lavish, catered affair at what looked like a high-end country club. My fingers trembled as I clicked on Rowan's tag. The floodgates opened. Photo after photo appeared. There was my mom, Ilara, in a chic mother-of-the-groom dress, beaming as she hugged Cleo. There was my dad, Marcus, clapping Rowan on the back, a proud, proprietary look on his face. There were my aunts, my uncles, my cousins. Friends of my parents, friends of Rowan and Cleo I'd never even met. Everyone was there. Dressed in cocktail attire, laughing, raising champagne glasses. The room was decorated with white roses and fairy lights. A banner in elegant script hung in the background of one shot. It said, "Celebrating Rowan and Cleo, October 12th. My entire family. They were all there. celebrating one of the biggest moments of my brother's life. And I was in a dusty cafe, in my sweaty hiking clothes, staring at a picture of a mountain. The primitive cabin with no room was a lie. The boring trip for old folks was a lie. They hadn't spared me from anything. They had simply, deliberately cut me out. The pain was sharp and dizzying. It wasn't just that I wasn't invited. It was the intricate, belittling lie they had constructed to conceal it. They didn't respect me enough to tell me the truth, and they thought I was foolish enough to believe the fantasy. Hot, bitter tears pricked at my eyes. I wasn't just an afterthought. I was an inconvenience to be managed. I sat in that cafe for what felt like an eternity, scrolling through the evidence of my own exclusion. Each happy, smiling pea. Hodo was another twist of the knife. I saw my Uncle Ben, who had always sent me birthday cards with a crisp $20 bill, laughing with my father. I saw my Aunt Carol, the one who had supposedly found the rustic cabin, posing with my mother, their smiles identical. The betrayal was communal. They were all in on it. The hurt was so profound it made me feel dizzy. It was a physical sensation, a hollowing out of my chest. All my life I had felt like I was on the outside looking in, but I had always assumed the window was at least open a crack. This was a locked door. They had planned this event, sent out invitations, coordinated outfits, and at no point did anyone stop and say, "What about Kaya?" Or worse, perhaps they did, and the consensus was that the party, that Rowan's night, would be better, smoother, more perfect without me. Why? Was it because my freelance career wasn't as impressive as Rowan's? Because I couldn't afford a gift as extravagant as the ones their wealthy friends would bring? Because I didn't fit into the perfect family portrait they wanted to present to Cleo's family? The not knowing was almost as painful as the act itself. My earlier triumph on the mountain felt like a joke. My solitary happiness seemed pathetic now, a consolation prize for a game I didn't even know I was losing. My hands were shaking, and I felt a wave of anger so intense it almost made me sick. It was the anger of being underestimated, of being played for a fool. And then I looked at the photo of myself on my phone screen, the one from the summit, my happy, tired, triumphant face. A different kind of anger started to bubble up, not the hot, messy kind, but something cold and sharp. My mom's words echoed in my head, "You go have a fun weekend. Do something for yourself." It was a cruel irony. They had pushed me away to have their perfect party, and in doing so, they had gifted me a moment of genuine, hard-won joy. They didn't deserve to have both. They didn't deserve their flawless celebration while I was left to nurse this gaping wound in private. My actions weren't born of a grand plan for revenge. It was a small, wounded, passive-aggressive act of defiance. I didn't want to scream at them. I just wanted them to know that I knew. I wanted to hold up a mirror to their lie. I opened my social media, my fingers moving with a strange sense of detachment. I selected the summit selfie, and I wrote a caption. Since the rest of the family is at their reunion this weekend, I decided to have one with myself, I typed. Found this amazing view on Mount Sterling. Hope they're having fun. It was subtle, it was innocent to an outsider. But to them, to the people at that party who knew the truth, it would be a tiny, perfectly aimed stone, shattering their perfect glass house. I tagged my location, Mount Sterling Summit. Then, with a final, decisive tap, I posted it. A moment later, I switched my phone to airplane mode. I couldn't bear to see the first comment or like. I didn't want to engage. I just wanted my message to exist out there in the digital ether, a quiet testament to their deception. I paid for my coffee, left the cafe, and began the long, numb drive home. I drove in silence, the radio off, the world outside the windows a blur. I was just trying to breathe. I got home to my small, quiet apartment, took a long, hot shower, and crawled into bed, even though it was only 7 in the evening. I was emotionally and physically drained. I fell into a heavy, dreamless sleep. I woke up hours later in the dead of night. My room was dark, but a powerful thirst had pulled me from my slumber. I drank a full glass of water, and as I set the glass down, my eyes fell on my phone, still sitting on the nightstand, dark and silent in airplane mode. Curiosity, that powerful, masochistic urge, got the better of me. I had to know. Had they seen it? Did they understand what they had done? I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. I took a deep breath and switched off airplane mode. The result was instantaneous and violent. My phone didn't just buzz, it felt like it convulsed in my hand. It was an explosion of notifications, a digital tidal wave crashing over the dam of my self-imposed silence. The screen lit up with a blinding cascade of banners. Missed call, Mom. Missed call, Dad. Missed call, Ra. Voicemail, Mom. Missed call, Mom. Text, Rowan 3 new messages. Text, Dad 2 new messages. Text, Mom 5 new messages. Missed call, Aunt Carol. On and on it went. A relentless, frantic barrage of communication. It was a digital scream. I stared, mesmerized and horrified as the number of notifications climbed. 27 missed calls in total, 19 text messages, 5 voicemails. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't the quiet acknowledgement I had expected. This was panic. This was fury. It was the sound of a carefully constructed world coming crashing down. My little post, my quiet act of defiance, had done more than just ripple through their party. It had set off a bomb, and they were blaming me for the detonation. With a trembling hand, I swiped open my phone, the screen still flickering with new notifications. The sheer volume of their outrage was overwhelming. I decided to start with the text messages, bracing myself for the venom I knew was waiting. I started with my father, Marcus. His messages were always short, cold, and to the point. Dad, your timing was incredibly inappropriate. Dad, you created a very awkward situation for your brother. We are extremely disappointed. Disappointed, that was his favorite word for me. Not angry, not hurt, just disappointed, as if I were a failing investment. There was no curiosity, no Kaya, what's wrong? Why did you post that? Just an immediate verdict. I was guilty of poor timing and creating awkwardness. Next, I opened the string of texts from my mother. Hers would be different. They would be couched in the language of hurt feelings and maternal martyrdom. Mom, Kaya, what was the meaning of that post? Please call me. Mom, people are asking questions. You've embarrassed us. Mom, your brother's fiancé is very upset. This was supposed to be a perfect night for them. Mom, how could you do this to your own family? After everything we do for you. This is a terrible thing to do, Kaya. Mom, I am so hurt I can barely speak. You have ruined your brother's engagement party. Ruined, there it was. That was the word that mattered. My innocent selfie, my statement of fact, that I was alone while they were together, had somehow possessed the power to ruin a party for 100 people. The accusation was so disproportionate, so wildly inflated that it was almost surreal. It wasn't their lie that was the problem, it was my quiet exposure of it. They weren't sorry for what they did, they were furious that they got caught. Finally, with a deep sense of dread, I opened the messages from Rowan. His would be the worst. His anger would be pure and unfiltered, sharpened by years of perceived superiority. Rowan, seriously. Rowan, you always have to make it about you. Couldn't let me have one night, could you? One single night that wasn't about your drama. Rowan, thanks for turning my engagement party into a referendum on your feelings. Cleo's parents think our family is a complete mess now. I hope you're happy. His words hit me like a physical blow. Jealousy, attention-seeking, drama. It was the same old script, the one he'd been reading from since we were children. In his world, I was a bottomless pit of need, and he was the long-suffering saint who had to put up with me. The idea that I might have a legitimate reason to be hurt was completely alien to him. He didn't see a sister who had been lied to and excluded. He saw a saboteur who had intentionally tried to wreck his perfect moment. The full picture began to form in my mind, colored in by a later, more tentative text from my Aunt Carol. She was a softer soul, more prone to guilt than the rest of them. Aunt Carol, hi Kaya. Things got a little tense here. A few people saw your post on their phones and didn't realize you weren't here. They started asking your mom where you were. I think it made things a bit uncomfortable. Uncomfortable, that was the real crime. My existence had become an uncomfortable fact that intruded upon their fantasy. Guests, probably making innocent conversation, had approached my parents. "Oh, where's Kaya? I thought the whole family was here." And my parents, caught in their lie, had no answer. The facade of the happy, unified family had cracked. The questions from the guests, and worse, from Cleo's parents, the all-important new in-laws, had exposed their deception. That's what I had ruined. Not the party itself, but their pristine image at it. The voicemails were even worse. My mother's voice was tearful and accusatory. My father's was clipped and frigid. Rowan's was practically a snarl. I couldn't listen to more than a few seconds of each. The onslaught was too much. They had built a cage of lies, and when I refused to sit quietly inside it, they raged at me for rattling the bars. My sadness, the deep, hollow wound I'd felt in the cafe, began to harden into something else. It was anger, yes, but it was also a strange, chilling clarity. They felt no remorse for lying to me. They felt no guilt for excluding me. Their only distress was that I had, however unintentionally, revealed their lie to their audience. They weren't upset that I was hurt. They were upset that they looked bad. I sat there on the edge of my bed in the dead of night, the blue light of my phone illuminating the stark truth of it all. They would never see me. They would never understand me. To them, I would always be a problem to be managed, a supporting character who had forgotten her lines and was ruining the star's big scene. The barrage of messages had been intended to make me feel small, guilty, and ashamed. They wanted me to call back, weeping and apologetic, so they could lecture me, forgive me, and restore their sense of moral superiority. But as I looked at the angry words on the screen, I didn't feel small. I felt a cold, quiet fury, and I knew I would not be calling them. The next conversation we had would not be on their terms, it would be on mine. I let them stew for a full day. My phone remained on silent. I ignored the sporadic pings of new messages. I needed the quiet. I needed to let my anger settle, to distill it from a chaotic storm into a single, focused point. This couldn't be a screaming match. Yelling would only allow them to dismiss me as hysterical, the dramatic daughter they always claimed I was. No, this required a calm I didn't feel but knew I had to project. On Monday morning, I got in my car and drove the 4 hours to my parents' house. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want to give them time to prepare, to align their stories and fortify their defenses. I wanted to walk in on the raw, unvarnished aftermath of the weekend. Their house, a large, pristine colonial in a manicured suburb, had always felt more like a museum than a home to me. A museum dedicated to the life and accomplishments of Rowan. His trophies were in the display cabinet, his academic awards hung in the hallway, his graduation photos held pride of place on the mantel. My own contributions were sparse. A few childhood photos, a small, framed print of one of my landscapes tucked away in a corner, almost out of sight. I parked in the driveway and walked up to the front door, my heart a steady, heavy drum against my ribs. I used my old key and let myself in. They were in the kitchen, the heart of the home. My mother, Ilara, was standing at the counter, her back to me. My father, Marcus, was sitting at the table, reading the newspaper. And there, sitting across from him, sipping a coffee as if he owned the place, was Rowan. Of course. The triumvirate was assembled. They were probably dissecting my latest crime. My mother turned at the sound of the door closing, and her face went through a rapid series of emotions. Surprise, then a flicker of fear, quickly masked by a stern, wounded expression. "Kaya, you should have called." "Why?" I asked, my voice even and calm. I walked further into the room, setting my keys on the granite island that separated us. "So you could have come up with a better story." My father put down his paper. "There is no story, Kaya. What you did this weekend was manipulative and deliberately hurtful." Rowan snorted into his coffee cup. "Hurtful, Dad, it was a childish temper tantrum on the internet." I ignored them both and kept my eyes fixed on my mother. She was the architect of the lie. She was the one who had spoken the words to me. "I have one question, Mom. Why did you lie to me? Ilara flinched but held her ground. We didn't lie, sweetheart. We just simplified things. It was complicated. Complicated? I let out a short, humorless laugh. It seems pretty simple. You had a huge party for my brother and you didn't want me there. So you invented a story about a rustic cabin to get me off your backs. That's not a simplification. That's a lie. Watch your tone, my father warned. No, I said, turning to him, my voice still quiet but gaining a sharp edge. I've watched my tone for 28 years. I've watched my tone while you paid for Rowan's condo but told me to be better with money. I've watched my tone while you celebrated his career and called mine a nice hobby. I am done watching my tone. Rowan stood up then, his chair scraping against the tiled floor. He was taller than me, and he used his height to try and intimidate, puffing up his chest in his expensive, casual wear. This is unbelievable. We had the most wonderful weekend celebrating a huge milestone in my life, and you have made it all about your petty grievances. My petty grievance is that my own family lied to my face to exclude me from that milestone. I finally raised my voice, the forced calm shattering. Do you have any idea how that feels? To see photos of your entire family, everyone laughing and celebrating, knowing that they actively conspired to make sure you weren't there. Oh, don't be so melodramatic, Ilara said, waving a dismissive hand. It wasn't like that. We were trying to protect you. There it was, the excuse I knew was coming. Protect me, I asked, incredulous. Protect me from what? From joy, from family, from celebrating my own brother. We knew you'd feel out of place, she said, her voice softening into that infuriating, gentle tone of concern. Cleo's family, they're very well off, very particular. It was a very formal, lavish affair. We didn't want you to be uncomfortable or feel pressured to get a gift you couldn't afford. The insult was so profound, so deeply rooted in their perception of me as a charity case, that it stole my breath. They weren't just exclude. Using me, they were judging me, my career, my life, and finding it wanting. They had deemed me unworthy of attending. So you think I'm what? The poor, pathetic artist's sister who would have shown up in rags and embarrassed you in front of the rich in-laws. My voice dripped with sarcasm. Did you think I was going to cause a scene, or did you just not want to have to explain my chosen profession to Cleo's father? My father stood up. That's enough. We made a decision and we stand by it. It was Rowan and Cleo's night, and we wanted it to be perfect. Your little stunt on social media proved our point. You always find a way to make things about you. I looked from my father's stony face to my mother's pained expression, to my brother's smug glare. The wall was impenetrable. They had their narrative, and they were clinging to it with absolute conviction. In their story, they were the benevolent parents, protecting their perfect night from their difficult daughter. They were the victims of my inexplicable need for attention. There would be no apology. There would be no acknowledgement of my pain. They couldn't, because doing so would require them to admit they had done something wrong, that their perfect family was fractured, and that they were the ones holding the hammer. A profound, sad stillness washed over me. The anger was gone, burned away by the cold reality of the situation. I was in a foreign country, speaking a language they would never understand. You're right about one thing, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I looked at Rowan. It was your night, and I'm sorry that my existence was an inconvenience to it. I turned back to my parents. And I'm sorry that I wasn't the daughter you wanted, the one who would have fit in better, been more successful, less in me. I picked up my keys from the island. Their silence was my answer. I don't expect you to understand, I said, walking backwards towards the door. But I understand now, perfectly. I didn't wait for a response. I turned, walked out the front door, and closed it gently behind me. I didn't slam it. There was no need for noise. The silence I was leaving behind was louder than any shout. The 4-hour drive home was a vacuum. The anger and hurt had been replaced by a vast, echoing emptiness. The confrontation hadn't brought catharsis or closure, only confirmation. It confirmed every insecurity, every doubt, every small hurt I had ever felt. It was all real. I hadn't been imagining the favoritism. I hadn't been overly sensitive. I had been seeing the truth all along, and I had just been handed undeniable proof, signed by the three people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. When I got back to my apartment, the quiet felt different. Before, it had often felt like loneliness. Now it felt like peace. It was a space that couldn't be touched by their judgment or disappointment. Here, I was not lesser than. I was just me. I didn't make a grand declaration. I didn't send a long, dramatic text announcing that I was cutting them out of my life. That's what they would have expected, another piece of drama to feed their narrative. I simply stopped. I muted their numbers in my phone. I went onto my social media and one by one, I unfollowed and then blocked Marcus, Alara, and Rowan. I blocked Aunt Carol, too, not out of anger, but out of a need for a completely clean break from their world. It wasn't an act of punishment. It was an act of preservation. I was drawing a boundary, a line in the sand that they couldn't cross with their excuses and accusations. The first few weeks were strange. My phone was quieter. I kept expecting it to ring with a call from a number I didn't recognize, my mother trying to circumvent my silence. But it never came. Their outrage, it turned out, only extended as far as their need to control me. Once I removed myself from their sphere of influence, I seemed to cease to exist for them. The silence was its own kind of answer, a final confirmation that their anger was never about love or concern for me, but about their own image. In the quiet, I began to heal. I poured my energy into my work. I took on new projects, experimenting with styles I'd been afraid to try. My photography, once just a job, became my sanctuary again. I reconnected with friends, the family I had chosen for myself, people who saw my freelance life not as a failure but as a brave and creative path. They had heard about the reunion fiasco, and their response wasn't judgment. It was outrage on my behalf. "That's horrible, Kaya," my best friend said, wrapping me in a hug. "You deserve so much better." And slowly, I started to believe it. One afternoon, about 2 months after the confrontation, I was developing photos from a recent shoot. It was a portrait session with a local musician. The images were raw, emotional, and powerful. I was proud of them. As I looked at the art I was creating, I thought about the box they had tried to put me in, the unsuccessful artist, the difficult daughter, the inconvenience. I realized that their definition of me was a cage built of their own limitations, not mine. My worth wasn't determined by their approval. My success wasn't measured by a corporate ladder or a hefty salary. It was measured in the beauty I could capture through my lens, in the quiet satisfaction of a day's hard work, in the peace of my own home, and in the joy of a hard-won mountain view. The wound is still there. A family is not a thing you can just discard like an old coat. There are days when a wave of sadness washes over me, a grief for the family I wish I had. I see a mother and daughter laughing in a cafe, or a brother and sister teasing each other in line at the grocery store, and I feel a pang of loss. But the pain is different now. It's no longer the sharp, acute pain of betrayal, but the dull, fading ache of a scar. It's a reminder of something that happened to me, not something that is me. They ruined their perfect night because their definition of perfect was a fantasy. It required my invisibility. My selfie didn't ruin their night, my existence did, and I will no longer apologize for existing. I have my own life to build, my own joy to create, and my own mountains to climb. And from now on, the view from the top is all mine. So I have to ask you, the listener, has a moment that was supposed to be about love and family ever been turned into a reminder that you don't belong? How do you build your own definition of family when the one you were born into fails you?